Welcome back to Unlimited Recaps. Today, we'll be diving into a horror drama film from 2010 titled The Tortured. Craig, a doctor, and his wife Elise, a real estate agent, seem to have a happy life together. Since their work schedules don't quite align, they take turns looking after their 6-year-old son, Benjamin. On this particular morning, Elise heads off to work, leaving Craig in charge of Benjamin for the day. After she leaves, Craig suggests they play ball in the yard. But as the weather gets hotter, Craig decides to head back inside to grab some sunscreen for Benjamin. What he doesn't realize is that a man parked in a car nearby has been watching them, with his eyes fixed on Benjamin. While Craig is inside, fumbling around in his wife's cluttered drawer, searching for the lotion, the car speeds up, and before Craig can react, Benjamin is gone. In a panic, Craig rushes outside, desperately trying to chase down the kidnapper. Frantically, he tries to flag down other drivers, asking to borrow their phones, but chaos ensues as the traffic builds up. Meanwhile, Elise returns home from work only to find the house swarming with police and reporters. She's stunned. As soon as she steps inside, she sees her husband, panic written all over his face. A detective pulls her aside, urging her to sit down and talk about her son's kidnapping. But Elise is overcome with terror, screaming hysterically, demanding to know where Benjamin is. Hours pass, and still, there's no news. No ransom demand, no contact from the kidnapper. Elise begins to fear the worst. Maybe this wasn't about money at all. Maybe this was the work of a psychopath who takes pleasure in hurting others. Meanwhile, poor Benjamin is trapped in a dark basement, calling out for his parents, terrified. His cries only agitate the man who took him, John Kozlowski. Annoyed by Benjamin's screams, John storms into the room with every intention of silencing him for good. Later in the day, 2 officers, Patterson and Alvarez, arrive at John's house after receiving some reports from the local community. John opens the door but doesn't let them inside. He tells them that he's going through a rough time and that the crying they heard was actually him. Officer Alvarez, however, isn't convinced and presses John about whether he has any children. John calmly responds that he doesn't and insists that he lives alone. With no other choice, the officers are forced to take a more drastic approach. As they search the house, room by room, Officer Patterson eventually stumbles upon a door leading down to the basement. Inside, the space looks abandoned, old, worn-out furniture, dirt, and dust everywhere. But despite the appearance, it doesn't take long before he finds the first clue: bloodstains, scattered tools like drills, screwdrivers, and a hammer, all smeared with blood. His heart races as he opens another door. In the dimly lit room lies the lifeless body of little Benjamin. Back at the house, Elise hears the phone ringing. She picks it up, and her world shatters. On the other end is the news no mother should ever have to hear: Benjamin is gone. She drops the phone. As they rush to the hospital, both Craig and Elise cling to a sliver of hope, praying that the body found isn't their son. But when they arrive, reality hits. It's him, the little boy they loved so dearly. In just a few hours, their happy world has turned into a nightmare. Devastated, Craig and Elise, now consumed with grief and anger, are determined to seek justice. They want the man responsible for their son's death to pay for what he's done. But when the trial ends, the court's decision leaves them stunned. John is sentenced to only 25 years in prison. Craig and Elise are heartbroken and furious, feeling deeply disappointed by the justice system's failure to bring them solace after the loss of their son, Benjamin. Overwhelmed with grief, Elise pleads with Craig to help her get a gun, believing they must do something to honor their child's dignity. Craig tries to reason with her, insisting that revenge won't bring Benjamin back, but their relationship begins to deteriorate under the weight of blame and sorrow. As days pass, Elise decides to leave Craig, needing time to think, which leaves him in despair. In a moment of hopelessness, he considers taking his own life, but is pulled back by the memory of Benjamin. This sparks a shift in Craig, transforming his sadness into a burning desire for revenge. Determined, he reaches out to Elise, and together they plan to confront the man responsible for their son's death. They begin by visiting the hospital where Craig works, where he gathers some medicine under the guise of his job. The next day, they follow John Kozlowski during his transfer to a high-security prison, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the convoy stops at a gas station, Craig and Elise create a distraction, seizing their chance to take action. Their plan is in motion. Revenge is within reach. The journey continues, and Craig and Elise trail the prisoner transport vehicle at a safe distance, waiting for the drug to take effect. Craig, being a doctor, is confident that the drug will cause the officers to experience severe side effects, forcing them to stop. His prediction proves correct. About 30 minutes later, the vehicle halts in the middle of the road as the officers, gripped by stomach pains, rush out in a panic. Seizing the moment, Craig sprints toward the transport vehicle and climbs inside, taking control. Elise follows closely in their car, her heart racing. As they speed toward the forest, Craig hits a deer that suddenly darts onto the road, causing the vehicle to skid to a halt. Although Craig suffers only a minor facial injury, the sight of John Kozlowski, bloodied and unconscious in the back, casts a heavy silence over them. They check on John, confirming he's still breathing but unresponsive. Without hesitation, they drive him to an isolated plantation house, hidden from view. Inside, they lay John on a table, still handcuffed. As he begins to regain consciousness, Craig looms over him, coldly informing John that he will be kept awake as part of their twisted plan. Using his medical knowledge, Craig prepares to ensure John stays alive and suffering. The next morning, while cleaning blood from their car, Elise receives a call from Detective Berger, who informs her of an accident involving the transport vehicle and John's escape. Elise feigns shock and disappointment, skillfully maintaining her cover. That night, tormented by memories of Benjamin, Craig's rage boils over. He storms into John's room and presses a lit cigarette against his stomach, reveling in the pain he inflicts. This fleeting moment of revenge offers little solace for the loss of his son, but it fuels his desire for more. The torture escalates the next morning. Frustrated with the cigarette burns, Craig takes a soldering iron and sears John's already blistered flesh, his screams echoing through the house. Elise watches in horror, feeling a pang of regret as she questions whether they've gone too far. Craig, blinded by rage and grief, dismisses her concerns. "What we're doing is nothing compared to what he did to our son," he says coldly, deepening her sense of emptiness. To prolong John's suffering, Craig prepares a syringe filled with a powerful drug and injects it into his neck. The transformation in Craig is stark. He becomes a person Elise barely recognizes, consumed by vengeance. John's body convulses violently as the drug takes effect, and as Craig and Elise continue their torment, they're interrupted by footsteps above them. A local man and his dog enter the house, sensing something amiss. Elise, maintaining her composure as a real estate agent, spins a story about the house being sold, and Craig plays along as the buyer. Thankfully, the man buys their act and leaves. Meanwhile, Detective Berger receives word that the missing transport van has been found and rushes to the scene to investigate. Back at the house, Craig and Elise continue to torture John. He claims he doesn't remember anything, possibly due to head trauma from the crash, causing doubt to creep in. Elise, however, remains unconvinced, believing John is lying, and demands he say their son's name while inflicting pain. Later that night, Elise wakes and heads to the bathroom. Meanwhile, John, still handcuffed, struggles to free himself and quietly makes his way upstairs. Hearing the bedroom door creak open, Elise freezes in fear, glancing at Craig, who is still asleep. With no other option, she grabs an iron pipe and swings it, knocking John unconscious. The noise wakes Craig, and together they drag John back to the basement. However, John regains consciousness faster than they expect. He fights back, kicking Craig down the stairs but doesn't attack Elise. Instead, he bolts for the exit. Meanwhile, the police are closing in, searching the area. They finally manage to catch up to John and apprehend him as he tries to escape. Now everything becomes clear. The man they've been torturing isn't who they thought. John Kozlowski, the real criminal who killed a child and is facing 25 years in prison, isn't the one they've captured. Instead, they had been tormenting Patrick Galligan, a man sentenced to 18 months for tax evasion and fraud, who was also in the hijacked van. Craig and Elise are horrified when they find Patrick has hanged himself. Nearby, they find a note he left behind. In it, Patrick confesses that he knows he's hated and that he deserved their anger, but he couldn't endure the torture any longer, so he took his own life. Craig and Elise are left devastated, realizing they had tortured the wrong man, Patrick Galligan, not John Kozlowski, the man who had taken their child. Please give the article a like and a comment if you liked it. Make sure to hit the channel subscribe button since I post a lot of movie recaps.